VoyMonk video voice vlog, and it is a Friday vlog. I need to stop trying to sing, but I'm not going to. Yeah, I know this week, I know last week I was talking about sports. This week I decided I did want to talk about news. But I thought it was important because I think sometimes when you hear about news, especially legacy medias or whatever coined phrases and things that people talk about, obviously the pivot is to more or less talk about the politics and things like that, which isn't at all what I'm talking about here or any of the contentious things that are specific as to the critiques and things of that mention as far as editorials. What I am talking about news and, speaking about this week is that basically I'm talking about the information and the reporting or lack of journalism that doesn't seem to be a thing that's happening. And I can honestly say that, with this being a Friday vlog, it's more laid back. Like I said, I want to basically encapsulate what I've been meaning to talk about this week, which is, basically about how the news has changed, and like I said, I don't mean as far as a, political bent or anything like that. I'm talking about just the sense and overall information and fact gathering. And I think, as I mentioned, it has a lot to do with the, time frame and where we are. Some people have kind of suggested that it has a little bit more to do with the fact that, there's a 24-hour news cycle and that there really isn't much to report, or whatever there is, it's oftentimes things that typically would go without note if this was maybe 20, 30 years ago, because quite frankly, there was a lot of information and a lot of news, but not a lot of opportunity and as many places to get that news. Hopefully that makes sense. The truth of the matter is, though, is that a lot of times, even in the spaces where I would call it conventional news, like your local news, a lot of that has just kind of turned into this, Mick News franchise-ish, national to local, uninspired. Again, production, overly produced over content, meaning what's actually the news is about. And I know oftentimes the criticisms I hear outside of the, political bend and all that stuff is about why is the news always negative, or, why isn't the news, talk a little bit more about this or that. Well, the former, I can say that, the news should really be whatever the news is. The latter, on the other hand, I guess I can more or less identify with that to a degree. It's like, I know this seems probably kind of weird, but I kind of miss the days when, maybe an investigative reporter would actually take the risk of getting punched in the face in order to get to a news source or actually ask a question that wasn't prescripted or performative or something that was not really about getting information or gathering it, but more or less about just capitulating and basically getting along and agreeing to disagree type of template when it comes to reporting. And that isn't to say that I think reporting or journalism should be nasty, but I think altogether what is inherent with such an endeavor is obviously, if you're trying to do what I think you're supposed to be doing effectively, that might come with some ruffled feathers. Because the truth of the matter is, especially when it comes to those who are in responsibility as opposed to just labeling it those in power, it's like, yeah, there should be accountability. There should be those who are asked to question, even whether I like or dislike someone, in terms of whatever's being asked or whatever my bias might be. I don't think there should ever be a situation where an adult, especially one who's given certain responsibility and has certain expectations, why answering or asking a difficult question should it not only be a prerequisite, but it should be a certain requirement. Like I said, yes, sometimes there are tough questions, and sometimes there really need to be some good answers. And one of the things that I've kind of known is that regardless whether it's politics or not, I know that there's, entire industries like public relations and AKA marketing, that have developed to try to control, try to, manufacture, try to manipulate an image rather than being sincere and letting, even if it's not necessarily something people want to hear or difficult conversations from happening, to make that a part of the reporting, and the journalism be about the fact checking, about the verifying sources and evidence as best as possible. I mean, not every reporter is a journalist. Not every journalist is a reporter. I get that. I understand it. And I understand that, some things that, may come across as being a bit of a, reporting like TMZ or something like that. I don't necessarily put that in the same light as like the local news that, I remember growing up, hearing the farm report, right? Because that was actually information that I think was helpful to the community. Keeping, local politicians, regardless of whether or not they be one or another, accountable for plan of action, campaign, discussions and promises. I think all of that should be in there when businesses or companies lose or, fail to live up to certain expectations the community's holding. I'm saying to you that when it comes to the news, oftentimes I don't feel very informed. I don't think that that's completely intentional or unintentional per se. Some people certainly have their views about that, but I don't say that, for instance, the alternative makes me feel any more informed as well. Because, again, sometimes it does come down to, the content over the production, and sometimes it is the production, even when it's an alternative source, that oftentimes gets the highlight and the shine and recognition, as opposed to maybe anything that really could be said of substance, or at least for me, importance, in terms of when I say that information that I can actually use that actually helps me out. And as far as some people say it's traditional, a legacy, or whatever news, some of those, as far as print, they're basically existing behind a paywall, and oftentimes I've never ventured very hard to even investigate that, because even for what I can get, I don't necessarily feel as, I would say print, by and large, or at least more recently, has been more helpful, but I won't say that it's been my altogether experience that it is or it has been. But more specifically, what I'm talking about and giving my experience growing up in the 80s and 90s. Obviously I was a kid, so it was a different time. But when news came on, the only time it was ever exciting is if they were talking about the local sports teams and the competitions that might have been going as far as that. And usually when it came to things like that, it was never something that was the first thing that was mentioned. It was always something on the back burner or the tail end after you learned about the farm report, and something that was deeply going to affect the local community in a direct way, in a meaningful way first. But now I swear I can hear about, and nothing against Taylor Swift, concert tickets that are being sold or overpriced or being scammed over the border, as opposed to, things that actually might affect more than just those who, are buying concert tickets, which is important. But, even in terms of a news source, like I said, sometimes it's just as, Taylor Swift is coming to town, so there's a traffic jam maybe. It's just, Yeah, I get it. I understand, but I don't know. I don't ever recall news being this way. And I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Minnesota, and like I said, 80s and 90s was obviously a bit of a different time overall, but those were some of the things that I definitely do remember and recall in terms of information and news sources and gathering and whatnot. And so, as I stated, the thing that was important to me was the ability to be informed. Like I could say the few things that actually do get mentioned, although not in as much depth or some of the food recalls, which seems, for a time to happen all the time. And it's just like, okay, but why? What specifically is going on? Why isn't there a reporter literally at the factory or, in front of the owner's house or the place of business asking what is going on? And it's just like, even when the limited scopes that those would happen, oftentimes, there's no push. There's no, like, when I say a political answer, I don't mean, specific political party, but I mean a political answer, or basically saying a whole lot of something that actually is nothing. And I guess I could be accused of doing that to a degree, but I just have a vlog. But I'm not, I'm not specifically expected to answer questions about meat recalls or anything like that. So, like I said, or a diplomatic answer rather, as opposed to one that actually, has some meat or information that is provided. And so, like I said, I know there's other elements too that people talk about, and it's like, I'm not sure entirely as far as where to go as far as some of the editorials that people mention or some of the censorship that'll happen. And I do notice that as well. But like I said, I'm not necessarily interested as far as a bend is in terms of, one belief system or another. I'm actually, my address has to do with, once again, the content over the production, actually performing news, actually having journalists, and actually having reports that mean more than, the occasional, oh, look at this puppy, and this puppy was, born or lost its legs and now uses a wheelbarrow as, and that's cute and that's nice and everything. But again, I don't know if that necessarily has to do with actually informing anyone about anything. That is a great story and it's beautiful, but it's a puff piece. And it's really one of those things that I can go a whole entire newscast and we wonder, well, what about that recall yesterday? And, or the brief tidbit that I'll hear about the recall, but the literal 2 minutes, people might be rambling on about Taylor Swift, and the other 5 minutes towards the tail end about the puppy with no legs and a wheelbarrow or something like that. And like I said, it isn't necessarily that I'm editorializing or suggesting that certain things can or can't not be a part of the report. I'm just simply saying that if the content was over the actual production, that maybe it would be more focused on being informed rather than it being news business or business news. Well, it's not much business, but business being more part of the news because the news has become more a part of the entertainment rather than actually information and journalistic integrity and standards, and I guess I would kind of like, along with the sports and any other kind of content, in my experience, I would like to see the more of the content, and even if it's not necessarily a spit polished. I definitely remember growing up in the local, being KMSP Irreceptive Channel 9, being a local independent source of news. And, there were some others, WCCO, KS2P, and whatnot. But as they became larger, as networks began to kind of envelop some of the stations on the local thing, especially now, that kind of went the way of the dodo bird. And I'm just saying, for me, personally, I would actually like to see a bit of return, or at least, like I said, not worried about the Ben, but worry more about the actual journalism. The kind of journalism that, as far as at least in entertainment, that was often written about in movies and stories and things that was, a part of a long line of traditions that I thought were really great and something I think would be kind of cool to see. Anyways, I think that is going to do it for this Friday vlog. I know it seem to have a little bit a deeper meaning. Like I said, and this is probably a little bit of a lighter Friday vlog. Like I said, but this is more in line with about the length of where I would go. But yeah, I talked about its news this week, and wanted to make sure that I highlighted this as part of it, because I talk about different kinds of content, and I think probably next week I might talk a little bit more about just content as it means more specifically YouTube, but and social. But I think I've pretty much covered that. So nothing too serious. Like, hopefully this. I think the nature by simply tackling certain topics can sometimes mean that they're super serious or whatever. This is not. Like I said, it's just a perspective that I'm sharing, and hopefully, if you're kind of the same way. It's like, it'd be cool if, and maybe share your experience as far as with the news, as far as the information and that kind of thing. That's cool. So until next time, have a great Friday. Take care.